Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. I'm David Iglesias, Director of Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You may be wondering why this podcast is called Three Things. You were probably taught by your parents, like I was, that it was impolite to talk to people about three things: religion, politics, and money. But what happens if your job is to talk about those three things? Well, let's find out. Welcome back to Three Things Podcast with David Iglesias. We've got a special guest today. In fact, it's so special, I have captioned his interview, The American Dream Attained. Our guest today is Ed Moy, who grew up in Wisconsin to immigrant parents from China. He worked in their restaurant where he worked as a cashier during his youth. It was there he learned to love the variety of currency used. This would be a perfect first job to Ed, who would eventually work in the White House and become director of the United States Mint. Ed graduated from the University of Wisconsin, where he triple majored. That is not a typo, folks. He triple majored in economics, political science, and international relations. He also worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield before working at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Moy also worked as the special assistant to the president for presidential personnel, where he recommended people for appointments. He worked with President George W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and the White House Chief of Staff on a regular basis. In 2006, he served as the 38th director of the U.S. Mint. Now, there have been more presidents than there have been Mint directors. Maybe Mr. Moy can enlighten us on that reason. He also worked in the private sector, which is where he currently is, lives in the Washington, D.C. area with his wife, Karen, and their two daughters. Well, welcome to Three Things Podcast, Mr. Director.
Yes, Captain, good to see you again. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Usually when people give me great introductions, it's because when I was Mint Director, I could give out free samples. So I just want to let you know that I can't give out any samples to you or Wheaton College to help you now.
Oh, that's too bad. I was hoping for a rare coin. Oh, well, we'll have to just do a good interview. Let's start with a little bit of a background. Sometimes you hear people say the American dream is over. Now, as the son of an immigrant, I have a problem with that, as I think you might also. So can you share your thoughts on the assertion that the American dream is over?
Yeah, I don't subscribe to that. And I think the American dream evolves over time, and it's different to different people. I know for my parents, my dad was born in mainland China. Lost everything during the Communist Revolution, fled as a legal immigrant to the United States, where he built a life, went back to Hong Kong to find a wife who could speak English. After a whirlwind romance, they came over to the United States. So why the United States versus Hong Kong or stay in China? And it's because they didn't see their life getting better staying in communist China. And he thought America was the land of opportunity. And for him, what opportunity meant was his family would be able to get better educated, create more wealth, be more independent, and that's why he came over. But for me, I living out his American dream. And for my children, I think the ultimate American dream, in my mind, for them, is growing up in a country where they can be whoever God created them to be. And so instead of me pushing them to be more successful, more educated, buy a bigger house and that type of thing, I really feel the freedom here to be able to explore how God made them and what type of person they should grow up to be and help them attain that vision. And so for me, the American dream is alive and well. It's just taken a different form over generations.
Absolutely. So I've interviewed one other person that I think the term American dream refers to. And like yourself, her parents were immigrants. In fact, one was a refugee from Cuba, so also fleeing communism. So it's just remarkable. People think that immigrants still come to this country. They're all illegal, and that's simply not true. My father came here legally. Your father did, and so did this other guest of mine. Mm-hmm. But here's a question I have. What do you think was instrumental? You've had an amazing life's journey, Ed. How did that happen? Your parents were immigrants. You grew up in Wisconsin, Waukesha to be exact, and you worked in the White House, and now you're living around the nation's capital. How did that happen?
Well, the short answer to that is you grab a hold of God's coattails. You never know where you're going to end up, and it's going to be some pretty amazing places I've discovered over time. Yeah, when growing up in Wisconsin, we grew up definitely lower middle class to middle class. One of the few ethnic minority families in our community, and as a result, a lot of the values that my parents had as immigrants, which I'm sure yours did too, is there was a certain thing that they did not want to lose honor. So their kids always had to have good jobs. They didn't want to be on welfare, not on government assistance. They came here to make their own way. And so all that was like kind of inbred, or I grew up with that attitude. And so in the restaurant, Chinese family is viewed not only as a way to keep the family name going, but also as an economic unit. So I waited on tables, did the cash register, bartended, bought produce, et cetera, et cetera. So I grew up with a very hard immigrant work ethic. But it wasn't until college that I was first exposed to Christianity. And by the end of my senior year, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And my dedication to him was to really focus on this intersection between how my faith and all of my life would be integrated, and in particular, what I did during my work hours. And so I really focused on what it meant to be a Christian working in business as well as in public service. And because of that focus and the willingness to go where God's called me, it's taking me to all these amazing places that I couldn't have even dreamed in my wildest dreams growing up. I couldn't write the career path I've had today.
Boy, does that resonate with me also. And is it true that you were advised early in your career to not go into public service?
Well, so it's really interesting. I spent almost all 4 of my years searching to fill this hole in my life. And when I came to the conclusion that I needed to take a leap of faith and accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, all of my friends who were instrumental in my spiritual journey had come to me to congratulate me, and I wanted to tell them and seek their advice on what I should be doing. And to a person, they basically said, "Are you going into full-time Christian ministry?" And I said, I'm a new Christian. I don't understand what that means. And they said, well, quite simply, it's becoming a pastor, a parachurch worker, a missionary, and then you need to go to seminary. But I said, what about everything else? And they said, well, you can redeem that stuff by sharing the gospel or having some personal integrity in whatever you're doing. But the highest calling is to full-time Christian ministry. And so they encouraged me that because I said, the way I'm wired, I'm not headed that direction. I'm headed into everything else. And then they all shook their heads and said, well, if you can, avoid business, avoid public service, because it's impossible to maintain your a strong faith in those. But instead, if you can try, go into social work, education, healthcare services, where it's a lot easier, and those things are much more consistent with Christian principles. I'm here to tell you that God wants his people in all walks of life.
Amen.
And public service, I believe, is a very high calling that there's scriptural precedent for, whether you take a look in the New Testament to the centurion and the tax collector, to the Old Testament, Joseph, who was prime minister of Egypt, Nehemiah, who was a secret service agent to the king, to Daniel, who was a prisoner of war who rose up the bureaucratic ranks in a foreign government. That there are all these examples of how God can use people in public service.
Wow, and that's a perfect segue because my father was a pastor, my mother was a missionary, my grandfather was a
What a great
pastor.
legacy, by the way.
Well, thank you, and I feel really blessed to have that. But no one ever told me. My parents never said, "Don't go into public service, don't go in the military." I mean, they kind of got it that we can be uh, full-time Christian workers regardless of our occupation, regardless of our profession.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you identified, or your friends identified, business and public service as two danger areas, and that is exactly why here at Wheaton College we have two courses that address those concerns. We have a class called Faith in the Marketplace and Faith in the Capitol House, and those classes bring guest speakers who are Christians who have flourished in those areas, and I think you've spoken in both of those classes.
Mhm.
So obviously you did not accept his advice, and it's a good thing you didn't. You've had a variety of jobs, both public and private sector. Can you share with us what's the most difficult job you had?
Hmm. You know, they've all had their pros and cons, just like every job. No job's ever going to be perfect. Um, there are times in every job that it could be extremely difficult. And I've had tough business jobs working as a executive in a public company, having to balance increasing shareholder value with the moral responsibility to try to do the right thing all the time. And I've had difficult times in public service where maybe making the right decision that benefited a lot of people is going to create trouble with a minority of people who disagree, and that can cause problems. And so, but I would say, aside from difficulty, some of the jobs that I have had the greatest amount of satisfaction from has been in public service. And most recently, working as a senior staffer in the Bush White House, helping the president staff his administration, and then being the director of the United States Mint, which makes our country's circulating coinage as well as collector's coins and precious metal bullion. Both of those were important because when I was at the White House, not only do you help the president select the leadership of the entire federal government during a transition, and it was a troubled transition, so we didn't have all the time we wanted, but I also helped then form the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, which had great meaning for me. And then at the United States Mint, I was there during a financial crisis, and as a senior executive in the Department of Treasury, my boss was Hank Paulson, and he took front and center role in that crisis. So I've been involved in a historic transition, a formation of a brand new cabinet department, and a financial crisis. And so, to me, those jobs have been very meaningful because of the role that God's had me play in the middle of those global crises.
Right. And for those of our listeners that may have forgotten the 2000 election, it wasn't decided for a good month after the election date. So you had about 30 less days to prepare the transition, and that must have been extremely difficult. Can you just tell us a little bit about the hours and the days you were working to play catch up?
Yeah, so it was really crazy because of the disputed election results, and we were waiting for the final determination in Florida, and then all the cases that were filed back and forth, going all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so we really officially didn't get started until December 12th. Transition times from the election day to inauguration are never long enough to start when you're trying to get a government going. And we had much less time. And so as a result, we were working brutal hours. I was coming in at 6 in the morning, leaving at midnight.
Oh, boy.
5 days a week. We even had people camp out in the transition offices, bring sleeping bags.
That's terrible.
Yes. But it also offers opportunities, and I'll share two of them. One of them was we could serve the nation by making sure the president got an extremely qualified team in place as quick as possible. And we started the administration being one of the worst staffed administrations in the history of the modern presidency. And the president was pretty clear. He said, what are the metrics that presidential personnel is measured by? And can you then forecast at our best effort, when can we beat every single record? And we determined that we could do that by September 1 of 2001. We did it by August.
Wow.
So the president became the best staffed administration in history by August. So there's opportunities to serve under that crisis situation. Second, it was really easy to see who the Christians were. Under that much pressure and working with and you've had your military service, and so you understand what this is. When you're in the foxhole, it's quite easy to see who your friends are.
Right.
And it's even easier to see who the Christians are. And so the Christians identified each other very early on in the transition. And we got together multiple times a day to pray about how God would use us, not only to share the gospel and get to know our colleagues, but how he would use us to make a nation better.
Right.
And to help the presidency. And through that, we decided then to continue after we were all selected to become White House staffers, that we would continue having a Bible study at the White House during the Bush presidency. And I was really fortunate to be part of the initial group that started that.
So let's get this timeline right. You get about 30 days less to do a transition. You're the most understaffed presidential team ever, but you catch up in a record amount of time. So we're up to August of 2001, and then 2 weeks later, 9/11 occurs.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about where you were on 9/11 and what was going on in your mind?
Yeah, so we were celebrating at the early in August because we had just broken all the records a month ahead of time. We could finally breathe a little bit. The president was planning on going to Crawford for his summer break in August. So we were all relaxing, and then we were just kind of figuring out, well, what are our next steps going to be early in September? And I happened to be in the White House on 9/11, and you can go to my website, edmoy.com, and I have one of the few minute-by-minute verified by Secret Service and all the people who were there, a timeline of what it was like to be in the White House during that time. And probably the most culture-changing thing for me was the evening of 9/11, when the president got back to Washington, D.C. I get a call from, so I was at home. We were living on Capitol Hill at the time. What was eerie was there wasn't any sounds in the sky. So normally you don't notice that, but when airplanes and helicopters aren't in the air,
Right.
It's eerily silent. And then I hear this huge whir of rotors, and I look up, and the president's coming in from Andrews, and there's like 5 Apaches and a V in the front. There are all 5 presidential helicopters. They're surrounded by other helicopters and armored carriers, and just like 15 helicopters flies over the top of our building. And as soon as they land, I get a call, and it's a military operator, and says, Mr. Moy, I have a Chief of Staff Card on the line. And I pick up the phone, and I hear, Ed, this is Andy Card. I'm calling on behalf of our Commander-in-Chief. Well, Andy's never talked to me like that before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And your Commander-in-Chief is ordering all his commissioned officers, which all the senior staff were commissioned at the White House as. He's ordering all his commissioned officers to duty first thing tomorrow morning. We have to show these terrorists that they can't disrupt the American way of life.
Right.
So, do I have your cooperation? Will you be there tomorrow? And I said, yes, sir, I will. And he said, good man, and click. And all of a sudden you realize that you just transitioned from a peacetime presidency to a wartime presidency.
Wow.
Now, I didn't serve in the armed services like you did, so it didn't fully hit me of what was ahead. But I knew that that 9/11 changed the way the Bush presidency was going to be, and that would change the type of people that we're looking for. So when you're looking for Surgeon General, you're just not looking for a public health official. You're looking with someone who has experience in bioterrorism and anthrax.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, and all this occurred as I was awaiting on my confirmation, because I had been nominated in August of 2001, and I had no idea how 9/11 would affect my confirmation. It turns out I was confirmed in record time. I mean, October I was confirmed, and I was in office as the U.S. Attorney in New Mexico. But that brings up the question about that a lot of people don't know much about. That is presidential appointees. That's what you were in charge of, the office that helped the president pick his appointees. And I think most people are aware that the president picks federal judges and Supreme Court justices and cabinet secretaries. But I'm guessing a lot of people don't understand the sheer number of people that the president gets to appoint. So if you could give us like a 101, presidential appointment 101, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to do it, David. Quite simply, the federal government is made up of about 1.5 million military and civilian that serve in the military, supply chain, etc. Employees, and the civilian civil service has roughly 2 million. So about 3.5 million people are employed in government, all have to report to a presidential appointee that's in charge of the president's policies and making sure they get implemented. And there's only 4,000 of them. And out of the 4,000, there's about 1,200 senior people like yourself that are Senate confirmed, but that also includes cabinet secretaries and sub-cabinet, like the deputy secretary, who's the chief operating officer, all the assistant secretaries, the heads of the agencies like the Mint that report to the Treasury. And then there's also judges and independent agencies that regulate, like the Securities Exchange Commission. And so the top 1,200 are basically repositories of the president's agenda, and they provide the leadership of these agencies or whatever area they're appointed to make sure the president's agenda gets done. And the Office of Presidential Personnel is the one who advises the president on who we should appoint in what positions.
I understand. So what advice would you give Wheaton students who might be interested in a career in public service, especially at the federal level and especially as a presidential appointee? What do they need to do to be considered?
Yep. So first of all, I would encourage all Wheaton students at one time or another in their life to consider a stint in public service. Whether that is on a school board or in elective office or in an appointment. This is a great country. Your success is tied to the freedoms that this country ensures for you. And as a result, I think we owe it to our nation to make it better. So then to answer your specific question, to serve in such senior positions is that besides the legislation that created those positions that would define certain specifications, the Surgeon General always has to be a physician. Sure. So that's in the legislation. We can't vary from that. But outside of what's mandated through legislation, every president does it a little bit different. So I can speak to how President George W. Bush did it, which most presidents will do some version of this. First of all, we're looking for someone who's uber qualified. So whatever that job is, we want to make sure that you at least have the qualifications, if not exceeded them by a considerable amount. And so it's very important to us that that person entering the job just wasn't someone the president favored and put in that job, and everybody else has to figure out how to support them. That happens in every administration. We tried to make sure that happened very little in ours. And everyone that we put into the job had the background and experience in order to do it. But we also wanted to make sure that the people in that job were all pulling in the same direction as the president wanted.
Right.
And so it was really important to have people who believed in what the president wanted to do in a particular area. Now, it's fine to have disagreements on how to get there. It's fine to have to bring up opposing arguments as we're talking about the best way to implement that policy. But it wouldn't, presidents generally do not put people who hate them and want to destroy their presidency into a job that's critical to getting the president's agenda done. And so, in short, what that means is you have to be politically involved. You have to pick a side, you have to get that president elected, and you have to be out there, whether it is making a speech at the AMA if you're a physician in favor of more free market principles for health insurance, or vice versa if it's a Democratic president. So you have to have the same policy considerations. And then lastly, the president implemented or made sure that there were a bunch of soft criteria, but they were really important to him. The president wanted to have a very cohesive administration that didn't have backbiting, that didn't have leaking and all this other stuff. And so we wanted people with a lot of integrity. Right. And we wanted people who weren't lone superstars. That it was all about them, right? So sometimes you interview people and you ask them why they want to do the job, and they would say, "Well, Ed, I've always dreamed about doing this when I was little. I have 15 ideas that I wanted to implement. So if the president puts me in, I'm going to do this, and that'll position me really great for a CEO job I want when I leave the administration."
Oh boy!
You generally do not want that type of person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? What you want is, boy, I never really thought about this, but when I really think about what America's done for me and made me an expert in this particular field, I have an obligation to help my country out. And it just happens that what you're asking me to do, I can use my experiences to further the president's agenda, which I've believed in a long time. And so I'm really happy to play a role in helping America be great. And I'm going like, boy, I wish we would have more of those types of people. And when you look at it, Christians naturally would fall into that, right? And authentic Christianity calls above your own selfish financial needs or ego needs, and you give service to the King. And so that's our ultimate boss. And for that type of Christian, there's a really good match to public service.
So what got you ready for the job as head of presidential personnel? I mean, you must have done something related to helping an executive pick his top people.
Yeah. President Bush, when he assembled his personnel team, there's generally two ways that administration has gone. One is, this is a place where you put a lot of campaign people in, because they know who supported the president, but they haven't done a lot of hiring and they don't know what these government jobs do. And as a result, you end up getting some problems. And you get ambitious people who are in presidential personnel, not really to help the president put in his team, but to take the first look at what's available and then position them for it. And then 3 months later, they're gone. And then you have no institutional knowledge in presidential personnel. The other route you go is bring in a whole bunch of headhunters who are experienced in this. But the headhunters are really good at figuring out how to recruit qualified people. They're not really good at how to figure out how to get people who are aligned with the president's agenda. And so what President Bush did differently was he recruited basically people who've done a lot of hiring, which I did in the private sector.
Okay.
And he knew me through several people that advised him closely that served on corporate boards with me and saw how I was able to say, I don't think we got the right CFO, and we need this to improve that, and then we can go public, kind of stuff. And so we really wanted people who had that hiring experience, but also did it within the context of accomplishing really great things. Mm-hmm. And so that's what made our team really unique. And it was headed up at the time. Our first head of presidential personnel was Clay Johnson, mm-hmm. who was arguably the president's oldest and closest friend. They roomed together in prep school. They roomed together at Yale, and so they go way back. And in addition to that, Clay was an executive at Frito-Lay and a bunch of other major companies and became head of gubernatorial personnel for then Governor Bush.
Right.
So because of that trusted relationship, Clay was able to make sure personnel was integral to the president's strategy. And because the president trusted Clay, allowed Clay to take the president's vision and translate it into people, of which I was the beneficiary, because they said Ed Moy wouldn't have typically gone into a presidential personnel, but he has this unique set of, he knows about ideological direction, mm-hmm. as well as hiring people, and he's put together teams that create lots of value. The president wants that for his administration.
Wow. So you left, you didn't leave the administration, but you became the director of the U.S. Mint.
Yeah.
How did that transition occur?
So that's a really great question. And so I have a number of funny short stories about that. I was one of those people who wanted to give the president options, right? And so after a year or so, most presidential personnel people get burned out after 12 months because it's a really intense job. Everybody that you recommend to the president that get appointed thinks that they never needed you. And all the people who didn't hate you as an enemy because you denied them something that they wanted. And so I would regularly talk to Chief of Staff Card and say, I'm willing to resign if the president wants somebody new. If I knew the president just said, just stop resigning. I want you here, right? And so finally, after many years of trying, we weren't able to have children. We adopted our first child from China, a girl. And so I went in and to inform the president saying, I have to resign. I'm becoming a dad. I'm adopting a girl. And I didn't wait this long to become a dad to let somebody else raise her. So I just can't work these brutal hours anymore.
Right.
And the president said, I get that, but I don't want to lose you. Give me a list of, if you were me looking at ways to place you, what would you recommend for yourself? And so I gave him a list. Next day, I get the phone call, and these are back in the old days of LED phones. And so my phone lights up, POTUS, which stands for President of the United States. And 9 times out of 10, it's always the president. But 9 times out of 10, it's the secretary calling, just saying, Ed, he's hot to trot on Surgeon General. And it just gives you 10 seconds to reorient your brain.
Sure.
So you can be competent when the president gets on the line. So I pick up the phone and I go, hey, Ashley, what's going on? What does he want? And there's a pause and it goes, Eddie, it's the president. Oh, no. Right. That's right. You try to stand up in your chair.
That's great.
President, he's sitting there and he says, I'm sitting here with John Snow, and we just decided that you're going to become the 38th director of the United States Mint. And I was just dumbfounded. And he said, hey, why are you so quiet for? This is on your list. When I said that I needed to leave public service, because I'm starting a family and I needed a job where I made a lot of money, I meant my own money, not the country's money. And then he snorted and laughed. He says, okay, good one. Just don't screw it up for me. So that's how I ended up becoming Mint director. And it was really, the pitch that I had made was, The Mint was really good at making coins. It's a manufacturing operation. It's basically a corporation that's owned by the government that runs on its own revenues. But it was having trouble figuring out its strategic future given the growth of electronic commerce.
Right.
And that's one thing that I'm really, that I think God's gifted me at, is helping thinking through those strategic issues. And then Secretary Snow agreed. But by the time I was confirmed, it was Secretary Paulson, who I also had a small role in recruiting him to that job. And Secretary Paulson and I got along great, and we were able to do some pretty important things during his term.
Great. And as I recall, that's a 5-year appointment. Is that right?
It is. It's one of the few administration jobs other than regulatory commissions, which normally have staggered terms for all the members, etc. But everyone else serves at the pleasure of the president, except for maybe 2% of those jobs.
Right.
And I had it generally because very few partisan issues are dealt with at the United States Mint. Our job is really to make circulating coins to meet the needs of the economy.
Yeah, I can think of another position. The FBI director is a 10-year appointment, and for the same reasons. You want law enforcement to be non-political, so that makes perfect sense. So you served President Bush and then finished up with President Obama, right?
Yes.
And when it was time for you to leave public service, was it difficult to do that?
You know, so it's really interesting. On the last day of the Bush presidency, the president invited me into the Oval Office with Hank Paulson. And it was one of the things the United States Mint does is it makes a medal for the president for each one of their terms. And this medal ends up being used traditionally among world leaders as an exchange of gifts and so on when they have their first meeting going back to Roman times. And so I had made a second-term medal and was ready to present it to him. And there was a dinner maybe 2 weeks before the end of the administration at the White House for all former White House staff. And we're going through the receiving line. The president said, "Eddie, I didn't forget about your request. I got something special. You're going to meet with me. You were with me on the first day of the Oval Office. You will be with me on the last day."
Oh my!
And so I presented that medal along with the 2 Mint artists that did that and Hank Paulson. And the first thing that the president said to Hank when he walked in the room is he said, "Did you know Eddie's my 8-year guy? He's been with me the whole time."
That's amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, so I did that and then served under Obama for about 2 years. And I'll tell you, after about 10 years of intense public service through the terrorist attacks and Katrina and the financial crisis, I was ready to leave. It's a long time to be in such senior positions. But I will say that I really miss having such a mission that is bigger than any singular person. I miss having that type of direction in my job. And I also miss the many talented people around, which I'm sure you do. Sure. I mean, leading the U.S. Attorney's Office, I mean, your AUSAs and your deputy, those are really good people. You're together intense for a short period of time, and those relationships last well beyond those jobs.
Well, that's exactly right. So what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I have a portfolio of different things that I do. I made the decision that adopting late in life, I needed flexibility to raise my daughters. And so I do what some Mint directors do, and that is our autographs are really valuable on graded coins, and so I sign a lot of autographs. I participate as an active member of several corporate boards, companies that do amazing things, that have ideas that could change the world. And there's an occasional consulting client that interests me because of the different types of things that they're doing. And so I'm really fortunate to be able to put together something that gives me a lot of flexibility, that compensates me well for what I do, gives me a lot of time with family, and allows me this this flexible lifestyle to kind of be open to what God has in store every day.
Wow, that's inspirational. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll be finished here. Do you have any suggested scripture verses that you'd recommend to your listeners, or maybe a better way of putting it is what is your life verse?
Yes, so it's actually not a life verse, but it's more of a life story. I resonate to some degree with Joseph.
Yes.
So you read Joseph about this great man of faith who ends up reconciling with his family at the end. But when you and I are in public service, we view that story much differently, right? We look at the scion of an agribusiness family.
Yes.
And he ends up being the youngest, but the dad picks him as CEO, the future CEO, and then the other family members say, "Oh no, we better get rid of this guy." And then next thing you know, Joseph has this vision that someday God's going to put him in high public service.
Right.
And so if it were you and I, we would think, Harvard undergrad, Yale Law School, because that's what produces the most amount of presidents. We become a councilman in Cairo. We eventually become mayor, get appointed governor of Alexandria, and then that's our way to end up being a prime minister. But instead, Joseph goes through this circuitous route. And the last time I looked, being an illegal immigrant, a convicted felon of rape, doing a prison sentence generally is not the best way to become prime minister of a country.
Right.
But yet, what it signals to me is it takes this son of immigrants who didn't go to any great schools and has this dream that one day he could serve his nation in some capacity, and grabbing onto God's coattails through corporate life and this and that, and then ending up in the White House. Boy, that's just beyond anybody's dream. And then given my unique background, being able to have that unique skill set and experiences be perfect for that particular time, I resonate a lot with how God used Joseph.
It makes me think of the verse from the New Testament, to him who is able to do above and beyond what we can ask or even imagine. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you probably share those feelings that as a young man, you probably couldn't have not imagined running the president's personnel office and then being the mint director. It just wasn't something that you would have thought of.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I want to turn the tables on you a little bit, because you come from a similar background, and but yet you've done state government, you've done military service, you've done federal service, and now you're in academia. That is not the standard career path. I don't think your parents had imagined that for their son as you were growing up. So if you could give me part of your story.
Yeah, so that's true. I knew I would be a lawyer, which I was, and still licensed and good standing. But my father was an immigrant like yours. He was proud of my public service. He's proud of my military service. My mother was a missionary initially and then became a school teacher. She was a Wheaton grad, so she would absolutely have loved the fact that I was teaching at her alma mater. I mean, it would have just lifted her 6 feet off the ground. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I didn't dream any of that. My dream was very parochial and very limited to, I'll practice law in my home state and I'll put in 30 or 40 years and then I'll retire. I had no idea to have all these adventures. God had all these adventures for me, similar to Joseph. Joseph thought he'd probably stay with his family and, rule the roost, which he eventually did, but not in the way that he went. So yeah, the story of Joseph is one of my favorite in all of Scripture. Now, I do have to ask you a very non-serious question, and I think you know what it is. What is your favorite American coin, and why is it your favorite coin?
Oh, David. So, asking a mint director that question is like asking a parent who is their favorite child, right? There's just no right answer to that. You love them all. But one of the things that, as I look back, that I am proud of is um, the uh, the redoing of what is arguably the greatest coin ever made in history in any country.
Oh my.
And it was developed by an artist called Augustus St. Gaudens in collaboration with President Theodore Roosevelt. So I'll just give you the 2-minute windup for this, because I think this will really inform listeners as to how coins can be used to transmit values. Roosevelt was president at the turn of the century, and usually when you have not only turn of the century but turn of the millennium, you have a lot of introspection going on, and what does it mean to be a nation? So all countries are kind of thinking through it. The Scandinavian nations, Sibelius wrote Finlandia during that period of time. Right. And for Roosevelt, he was a coin collector. And so he looked at these coins and said, coins are an extension of a country's identity.
Right.
If you looked at American coins, you would swear that we were a European country. We have the leader on the front. We have symbols of power of the state on the back. And I want a uniquely American-looking coin. So we went outside the mint to ask probably the most famous American artist at the time, Augustus St. Gaudens, who was thinking through, as a sculptor, what did American-looking sculpture look like? And so we went to St. Gaudens and said, I got a secret project. Will you redesign American coinage, starting with the $10 piece and the $20 piece, because those are our most prestigious gold coins. So we redesigned those, and the $20 piece, which is known as the double eagle, features the full figure of liberty, marching into who's ever looking. And she's wearing a Greek-Roman gown. So St. Gaudens was saying that the liberty that lives in the United States, it has its roots in Greek and Roman philosophy, in Western civilization. She's carrying a torch in front of her and an olive branch in back of her. And what that symbolizes is, if you're a Christian, the torch said, this is the lamp of God. And if you weren't, this meant enlightenment, like the Statue of Liberty.
Sure.
And the olive branch meant peace. And so what the coin was saying is, where God or enlightenment leads liberty, then peace will follow with that country. Beautiful. And then you see her climbing up this mountain, and at the very bottom of the valley is the U.S. Capitol, which was the epitome, the city on the hill, of which this concept of freedom, this special breed of freedom, had its first home, and now is leaving that to march into the rest of the world to carry on that message. And on the back of the coin has a young American bald eagle before it gets its crown, flying over a sunrise. And the symbolism was obvious. This is a young country, young America, at the very beginning of its day. And so that coin, because it was this clandestine project between Roosevelt and St. Gaudens, the mint hated it and really dumbed it down to where it lost most of its symbolism and artistic beauty. So when I became mint director, we recreated this coin for collectors and created it the way that St. Gaudens and Teddy Roosevelt had envisioned. So when St. Gaudens did a sample and showed Roosevelt, Roosevelt said, I want it done exactly this way. And then the men said, oh, we can't do it that way. We have to do this and this and this. And to mass produce it, we got to make it flatter and blah, blah, blah. So we went back to that as a way, A, to show the mint that we were on top of all the new technology to make this type of coin, but B, to remind our country what our roots and our values were.
Wow, that's a great story. And after our podcast, I'm going to look it up in full color. I
Yeah.
think I've seen that coin, and you're right, it is spectacular. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our interview, but I want to thank you for your time, for your pearls of wisdom, or should I say your coins of wisdom, and wish you a happy Advent season and a Merry Christmas. And I hope to see you on campus next year when we're able to host live people.
Yeah, and David, I want to say also to you, thank you for your service to our country. You've done that in multiple roles, including putting your life on the line. And thank you for what you're doing now. I have greatly enjoyed the classes that have been birthed under your leadership and teaching in them. And I think we're really equipping the next generation of Christians to serve our nation well.
Amen. Thank you so much, and we will be in touch.
All right.
You have been listening to Wheaton's Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics podcast. 3 Things with host David Iglesias. Join us again in 2 weeks for a new interview with an accomplished faith, political, and business leader.